Yo, Corey with Real Filmmaking, and today let's talk about characters. You ever watch a movie that's not really that good, but you hope that it gets better, so you just sit there and you keep watching and watching and watching and watching. 90% of what makes a film good is the characters and the story that's being told. If you have good and compelling characters, people want to stay around and watch your movie. If you don't, then they're out of there. So today, I wanted to take a look at the different types of characters and how those are used in a story. My hope is that you can use this when you are writing a screenplay for your movies or anything else narratively based. This goes across the board. So without further ado, let's get into it. So starting off, we've got two categories of characters. You've got your major characters and your minor characters. Major characters are characters that are main players in the story. The main plot points revolve around the things that happen affect them primarily. When you look at the structural narrative graph that I talked about in my other video, they're kind of the focal point of everything. And then on the other side of the fence, you've got the minor characters. The minor characters' role most of the time is to kind of be a supplementary character to the major characters. They sometimes do things to help move the plot forward. They are there to complement the major characters. They can do things that have significance in the story, but generally most of the time they're relegated to kind of like background things. You want to have a good mix of major and minor characters in your story because all the main event, you can't have like 7 main characters in your story. I mean, you can. It's a lot more difficult. But generally, you know, in a cast of like 5 characters, you'll have maybe 1 or 2 major characters and 3 characters that are more of the supplementary minor characters. So then you've got your protagonist and your antagonist. The protagonist usually is a major character. They're usually the main character, but they're the one that's trying to accomplish or overcome some sort of problem or conflict within the film. You know, maybe they're trying to go on a quest and find something. Maybe there's somebody that they're trying to defeat, you know, to gain power over something. They have some problem that they're trying to figure out. They're usually the character that, like, we side with, so generally they're the good guy. Not always, you know, and sometimes, you know, the protagonist is someone who isn't doing something we agree with, but the story is revolving around them. On the other side, you've got the antagonist, and the antagonist is the character that stands in direct opposition to the protagonist. They are the source of problems for the protagonist. The antagonist always doesn't have to be another character. It can be like an opposing force. It can be any number of things. You know, in a movie where somebody is like stranded alone by themselves or something, like I think Castaway, the antagonist is more of the problem of he can't get off the island. So when you're writing your short film, a good way to look at the protagonist and the antagonist is to figure out, when you're writing your story, what do I want my story to be about, and what is kind of the simple central problem I want my main character to overcome. And is that better handled by another character, or is it better handled by maybe a situational thing? So like I mentioned Castaway earlier, maybe you want to do a short film where somebody is lost in the woods and they're trying to get out, and them trying to get out of the wood, the antagonist in this case is like the woods. They're, you know, it's dark, it's late outside, they're trying to get out. Even though there is no antagonist in terms of a character, the character of the woods or the forest, that is the antagonist. So kind of keep that in mind when you're writing your stories. You know, I always think simple conflict, is this better handled by a situation or another character? And then I try to write that into my story. Next, you've got your dynamic characters. Dynamic characters are the characters that we love to watch on film. They're the characters that start one place and then they end up someplace else by the end of the film. Maybe somebody who starts at one end of the emotional spectrum and by the end of the film, they've moved over here, like they've learned how to experience this new emotion that, you know, they expressed earlier in the film that they would never be able to feel that. That's a great example of a dynamic character. So along with dynamic characters, you also have static characters. Static characters are very rigid in their design. They're characters that, you know, usually are written to evoke one emotion or one theme and to only be that. Maybe it's the hardened war vet who only looks at this certain thing and he represents, like, you know, the cruelty of war. Or maybe you have like the best friend who she's so just in love with life, you know, and she represents like happiness and joy, and like that's all that you ever see her present in the context of the story. Those are very static characters. They're not supposed to change. Their purpose is to represent an idea or a theme in the story. They're not really supposed to grow and change over time. So when you're writing your short film, again, you want a good balance of dynamic and static characters. Generally, your main character, your protagonist, is going to be more dynamic because we want to see some change and growth in them. You know, the story is affecting them. Generally, like to have a good story, the character is going to be affected on like a deeper level, and that's probably going to change them. By the time you get to the climax of the film, you want them to have experienced something that is drastic enough to change, you know, how they perceive the world, or something physically happened to them. So you want them to be more of a dynamic character. Whereas your static character, like I mentioned, they might be kind of, you know, like a side character, a minor character that just represents a certain ideal. When I do my writing, I try to think of who is going to be my protagonist, my antagonist, what is going to happen to my major character, how do I want them to grow? Like, I want them to start off, you know, maybe really happy, and by the end of the film, I want them to be, you know, really sad or depressed because this thing happened to them. And then, you know, I'm figuring out how does the plot get them there. In terms of, you know, like how do I put static characters into my story, it's like what themes or what ideas do I need represented, and, you know, is that best done through some visual aspect of storytelling, or is a character, you know, like saying something or just being present in a situation, is there some way that they can represent that idea? And so I try to kind of find a good balance between those things. Finally, we come to the last set of characters, which are our round characters and our flat characters. So this is kind of similar to static and dynamic characters, but it's not exactly the same. This deals a lot more kind of with like the emotional aspect of the characters, more of like who they are, like how much we get to know these characters. Where static and dynamic deals with more of how the characters are presented in terms of the plot. Round and flat deals with more of like how we get to know them as a person experiencing the story. An example of a round character is a character that we get to see kind of like their emotional palette. We get to see all of that. We get to see them, you know, experience different things, see how those things affect them. We kind of get inside their head more. Think about when you're reading a story and it's from first person point of view, or it's from third person, you know, limited. We only see it from that character's point of view. We're a lot more inside the heads of those characters. They get fleshed out a lot more. They're round characters. We get to see all the nuances of, you know, how they think, how they act, how they do these things, as opposed to a flat character where it's, again, we only see kind of one slice of who they are. Maybe in a short film, we see a minor character show up that does one thing. They act one way, they represent one emotion. And again, all these things, all these types of characters, they're not mutually exclusive. A lot of them will be paired together. And so a static character in this sense could also be a flat character. They're just very one-dimensional. And so the flat character is a character who, you know, we only get to see kind of one emotional component of them at a given time. How I incorporate this into my writing, especially in short films, is I figure out the central plot, what is my conflict, who is my protagonist, my antagonist, and then I start to shape the characters. My main character generally tends to be dynamic. I want to see the growth that they bring to the table. They're round. Holistically, I want to get more inside their head. I want to see how they're processing things. And, you know, the characters that I need to help move the plot forward or just do one thing or represent one type of idea, they tend to be static and flat characters. And so having a good balance of that in your writing is what makes a story engaging overall. Well, that's all I've got for you about characters today, guys. I hope some of that information helps you in, you know, whatever writing projects you've got going on. So the next time you're watching a movie, try to like pick out like, oh, there's a major character, or oh, there's a round character, or a flat character. You'll be surprised by how much that you pick up. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. And until next time, get out there and make some movies.